Welcome to the Opinion Show, where we discuss issues of the day with the editorial board of the Plain Dealer and cleveland.com. We're going to talk about last night's Republican debate, the fourth in a row. Right now we have 8 candidates, including Ohio Governor John Kasich, who may be holding on by his fingernails to that role and not in the undercard debate. But this one was hosted by Fox News. It was in Milwaukee. And Kasich got some licks in, but some people got some licks in on him. Ben Carson didn't stumble as he was expected to, but maybe he wasn't asked those tough questions. So we're going to talk about that and more with members of the editorial board. I'm Elizabeth Sullivan. I direct the editorial board, and I'm joined by editorial writers Pete Krause, Ted Diadin, Chris Evans, and Sharon Broussard. Sharon, I know that you stated right off the bat you had some strong opinions after watching that debate, so why don't you share them with us?
Yeah, I definitely did. About Kasich, one of the things I thought about, he's kind of like Cassandra in the Trojan War. He said a lot of good things about immigration. He ridiculed basically, Trump's idea of deporting 11 million people. That's not what the crowd wanted to hear. But it's obviously what needed to be said, even if it lands him, even if he, at the kiddie table or worse, just out of the race. And the other thing about Ben Carson and how he handled the charges that he lied in his biography is that, honestly, he got a real softball question about that. And then there was no follow-up on, any of the issues that those brought forward. So in a way, I don't think it put anything to rest for people who still have questions, but I mean, honestly, I would be less worried about Ben and his autobiography and more worried about what he talked about in Iraq. He said he bombed the caliphate. It's like, wait a minute, how do they have a caliphate already? Isn't that what we're trying to stop them from getting? So just he just did not seem to understand very much about foreign policy at all.
And interestingly enough, this debate was supposed to be about economic policy, right, but it still got into the strategic questions of the Middle East, and that I think is because everyone recognizes that the country's economic vitality does play into our national strategic goals. But at any rate, Pete, what did you think about some of the economic issues that were raised? They talked a lot about taxes, for instance.
We talked a lot about taxes. Everybody seems to have the same thought that there needs to be lower taxes, some kind of tax reform. Some people talk about a flat tax. I think that's what Ted Cruz, Rand Paul has Ted Cruz had like a 10% flat tax. Rand Paul talked about a 14% tax for businesses and a 14.2% tax for individuals, some such. And of course, they also, all of them want to reduce regulations and get regulations off the backs of everybody, including Obamacare, which was the big boogeyman as always. But they never, they all talk about repealing Obamacare, yet nobody really came up with, actually somebody came up with an alternative. I think it was Carly Fiorina who talked about states offering pooled markets,
yeah, she did,
and so forth. But it was a lot of the same old stuff that they were talking about. They did get into, as you mentioned, some foreign policy questions because those do affect the economy because so much money has to go into funding wars. But they also got into immigration, and that's a big part of the economy too because of so many immigrants who are here working. And there were some specific differences there.
I mean, do the Republicans risk sort of boxing themselves into a too conservative position in the general election? This was an issue that actually Kasich raised, and I thought very effectively that, come, November of 16, are they going to regret kind of trying to out-conservative one another in these debates? What did you think about that, Chris?
Well, in listening to you guys, this is why I watched the Cavs game last night. But I did read the transcript. A lot of this stuff just puts me to sleep. I mean, it's just cliche after cliche. It's this policy wonk stuff. I think Ben Carson at one point talked about opportunity, ascending the ladder of opportunity. It's like, what the hell does that mean?
But mixed in with those sorts of cliches or hyperbole or deflection, which we know that all politicians are very good at, I thought that there was a lot of light shed on people's positions, because in this debate in particular, it seemed that candidates were much more willing to challenge one another. You know, Rand Paul jumped in there and tried to clarify, you know, for the benefit of Donald Trump, what the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement actually included, the countries it actually included. I mean, there was a lot there. Kasich got kind of attacked on his position on the banks.
Kept interrupting everybody.
Well, and also Rubio and Rand Paul had I thought, a pretty good exchange about, you know, what it means to be a conservative, because Rubio, I guess, wants to increase the defense spending, and he also wants to provide a tax credit. I think it was for preschool education or daycare, which was going to add a lot to the budget. And Rand Paul said, how can you really call yourself a conservative if this is going to? And he threw around like $2 trillion combined, which, you know, he's probably exaggerating, but that's a substantive policy issue. You know, they talk about defense of the country and the cost involved. And Rand Paul said, you know, I'm all for defending the country and having a strong military, but I also don't want to go bankrupt.
So Ted, what was your big takeaway from?
Well, I thought Kasich had a lot of good moments. You know, that trip around the world with all the bullet points, I think he was very effective with that. And his immigration comments, where he just, I thought, made Trump look ridiculous. But the thing everybody's going to remember are the boos that he got on the bank issue, and some of the other, and his whininess. You know, it's kind of too bad that he got involved with that. You know, the thing I can't even believe I'm saying this, because I've thought all along that Ted Cruz is unelectable, and yet I thought he was very thoughtful, and I thought he did real well last night, and you know, with substantive answers, and you talked about people trying to out-conservative each other. He made the point, I think it was him, saying that we haven't really had a true conservative run for president since Ronald Reagan, you know, and he's proposing himself as the answer to that. But maybe the bad news for Republicans is that he may well be electable for the nomination, but I still believe he's unelectable in the general.
And I thought that was the more interesting thing in this debate, where you started to see both Kasich and Jeb Bush and to some extent Marco Rubio too, presenting themselves as that, and maybe Fiorina, though it's hard to tell with her answers. She's always talking about her success in business, which we know isn't
really good. Got ended badly for her.
But those three in particular, who are politicians by profession, clearly trying to position themselves for that moderate, centrist stance that maybe could do well against, you know, what's increasingly looking like a Hillary candidacy.
Right.
So, although Fiorina kept bringing up the Clintons, and you know, clearly. Maybe, I don't know, maybe she's trying to say maybe a woman should take on a woman. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
You know, what do you think
Well,
about
there's
that?
something implied in what she says to that.
I would
degree,
love to
think.
see Hillary and Trump in like a cage match, and see who would come out of. They would tear each other up.
People keep
All right, well,
waiting
let's cut to the chase. Who do you think is going to be the nominee?
Oh, I didn't know we were going to answer that question today.
I don't think there's any candidate that
Yeah, I
stands
think we're
out.
gonna
In
be
my
wrong.
mind, and you've got eight people on the stage. I mean, it's ridiculous. It's like you're watching people standing in line, you know, to buy a train ticket. You know, until they get down to maybe three, you know, you're not gonna. I just don't think you're gonna get some, you know, substantive conversations about issues, which is what people care about. And the questions that were coming through Facebook and Twitter and email were all about the economy. They were about the minimum wage, raising minimum wage and stuff like that. And the candidates were not, well, minimum wage, they were against it, but they weren't really addressing that.
Betsy, I'll give you a real quick handicap, okay? Trump, unelectable. Carson, unelectable. I actually didn't think Carson did that well last night.
No,
I don't think he
not at
really
all.
understands economic issues.
Or foreign policy.
And things are just kind of strange in his life. But anyway, Marco Rubio increasingly, and this is, I'm not the only one saying this, obviously a lot of the pundits are, increasingly looks strong and somewhat presidential. Jeb Bush is hanging in there, and I like Kasich. I do think that he's struggling, and I think he did struggle on that banking issue. Ted Cruz, I think, like you guys said, will do well in a primary, but he's not electable, which leaves, and Rand Paul. Rand Paul did well the second half. The first half, it really troubled me, though, when he starts talking about the Federal Reserve, and he kind of sounds conspiratorial, and he talked about how, people can rise up and you can decrease the wage gap through the machinations of the Federal Reserve, and that was just kind of goofy.
Yeah, I would say Rubio, because I think what Rubio's trying to do is still be the conservative on various issues, but on the other hand, throw bones out there to other people. That's, I think, what the child care tax is about.
And
he's like the compassionate conservative.
Some bones in his closet that are still going to come out.
Yes, with that credit card.
Asked about the finances of using that, and when his campaign released documents, they were very incomplete and did not give portray a full picture of.
He may have some.
I think he'll probably get past that. I kind of agree with the rest of you guys. If I had to bet right now, it would be on Rubio.
And he's young.
I keep waiting for the Trump and Carson train to derail, and it's going to happen. It's just so far away. I don't think that people are just kind of enjoying, voting for him or telling pollsters.
Yeah, right.
So I mean, guys don't know what they're talking about. They really don't. Trump says nothing. And I read somewhere that what came out of last night is nobody's afraid of Trump anymore, and I think that kind of was true. Carson, you talked about his comments about when he was young and his scholarship and everything. The troubling thing to me about that was not so much that he was meeting a good story halfway when, about his youth. But the guy who wants to be commander-in-chief doesn't know how people get into West Point. They don't go there on a scholarship, they're appointed.
Everybody, right, exactly, can get in there.
There may have been the bones of truth where somebody said if you apply, you would have a good chance of getting an appointment, but that's not how he
And here's the other thing.
He doesn't seem to know.
And Ted, that's so easily checked. I mean, you don't have to make a mistake on that. You could just check it and check it against your remembrance and clear it up.
He wrote. It was in a book that was published. His editors didn't challenge him on it. Every reader that read it, nobody challenged, it doesn't make you wonder about.
He never thought he never thought he was going to run for president, probably at that time. But that just goes to tell you, if he didn't have the character to be honest in that setting, but then would he have the character to be honest as a president? I have concerns about it.
We're sitting here on Veterans Day having this discussion. Not a single one of those candidates is a military veteran. Right. We haven't had a military veteran in the presidency since the elder Bush.
George W.
He was in the reserves.
Well, okay.
He was
if you count the
reserves,
sort
of. This way, that we haven't had somebody who saw action in overseas conflict since the elder George Bush.
I think George, didn't he fly out over the Gulf of Mexico once?
It was dangerous, all those drug cartels shooting in the air.
I have to say about Trump, to kick him one more time, he was talking about immigration, and he was talking about how everybody loved Eisenhower and how...
I had to look him up last night, I looked that up.
He also shipped out a bunch of immigrants, and you know what they called that?
The Operation Wetback.
Oh my God.
The Washington Post fact-checked that.
That's what I read.
And the numbers are grossly exaggerated. They say it was actually not very well documented.
250,000 they thought maybe.
So to speak, but
I don't care if it was 250, but to bring that up with that name and
that
history,
but that
clearly is.
But that's him.
So do you think now that Christie's been relegated to the kiddies table, I mean, he's out?
No, I missed Christie. I wish Christie would come back and Jeb Bush would get on with the rest of his life.
He apparently tore it up. Henry Gomez wrote in his article.
I didn't see it, but I read it.
But it's not, how hard is it to do well at the kiddie table, though?
Well,
I mean, Fionn isn't really seriously.
That's right.
I remember she rose from it,
because of her performance in the
Rick Santorum, Bobby Jindal.
I mean, is Christie, is he electable?
They're not dummies, but not very strong personalities as Chris Christie is.
Apparently I'm one of a very small minority who does, so I don't know.
I mean, does it bother anybody, though, that like Lindsey Graham, who is a veteran, is not even considered a serious candidate?
Is Lindsey Graham a veteran?
Yeah.
Yes.
Where did he fight? What, Vietnam?
think he was in the Gulf, but I would have to look. It might have been Vietnam.
Yeah, I don't know.
No idea.
Yeah.
I did not know that.
Yeah. Yeah. But at any rate,
It would be a helpful thing to have on your resume, considering this country will probably be sending men and women somewhere to fight.
Yeah.
So yeah, it
I
would
don't
be
know,
good
but
to
look at all
have a
the
veteran in
presidents,
the race.
like you
but-
mentioned, look at all the presidents we've
I
had
know.
that were not,
Yeah.
may have been in the military, maybe not fought in wars, but, it's, and Ronald Reagan,
Acted in movies
yeah, he was.
about the war, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do think it makes a difference when somebody
Mm-hmm.
has served, that they understand the sacrifice, and they
Right.
understand what's at stake when you threaten military
Absolutely.
action and,
Yeah.
don't deliver, or
No.
when budget cuts threaten the well-being of our
Although
armed
who's-
Which
forces.
reminds me of my old friend Jim Webb. I
Yeah.
wish he'd switch parties and jump in there.
But Reagan stared down the Soviet Union, and there wasn't a military aspect to that. But if things didn't work out down the road, there could have been.
Well, actually, the consensus view on that is that really what happened was the Soviet Union went bankrupt because it kind of got to the point
Well,
where
yeah.
it couldn't sustain economically its military
But Reagan knew that, and he kept the pressure on, right?
He
Well,
did. That's right.
I
Mr.
think
Gorbachev, tear down that wall.
I think he understood the rights and wrongs of oppression in Eastern Europe,
And
but
I
I'm not
hope-
so sure he had the pulse of their economy
Yeah.
at his
Well,
fingertips.
What I would say, at least with the Cavs game, there was a clear winner.
Oh, that's a good point. That's a good point.
Well, all right. I mean, who do you think kind of got the advantage from this? One word, because
okay.
we're out of time. Rubio. Oh, you didn't watch
Cavs.
it. Okay. Ted?
Cruz rose the most, but I thought
Okay.
Rubio
Okay.
is the leader.
Okay. Pete?
Rubio, but I still like Kasich too. I still think he's got some.
Just got to stop interrupting people.
I think Kasich.
That's the only way
I
you
think-
can get
I
in
think
with a
actually
debate of
Kasich,
8 people
my
is
view,
to interrupt.
Kasich, yeah.
Really,
you like
it really is.
Kasich.
I
Yeah.
thought Kasich,
Yeah.
despite the banking thing. Anyway,
Yeah.
that's it for today. Thank you for watching, and we really would like to hear your comments and your observations, and who you think is going to win and who should win in the comments below. Thanks.